superpower, the Soviet Union. Bin Laden's contribution was mostly financial. His vast personal wealth from his Saudi Arabian family allowed him to build roads and finance recruitment. But Bin Laden, even then, had an uncanny ability to make himself into the stuff of legend.
Osama bin Laden does tell a story about how a mortar landed very, very close to him or to some people in his brigade, and at that moment he had a vision that he was entirely happy to die if that was necessary in the cause of jihad. Indeed, he spins that, and I suspect he spins an awful lot more. But
Michael Griffin is a London-based journalist with the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. He's author of the book Reaping the Whirlwind, which describes Bin Laden's mythology.
He certainly knows how to play the media very effectively. I mean, simply looking at the way he comports himself, he's always dressed as a desert sheikh, if you like. I mean, obviously he wears the camouflage outfit of the jihadi warrior, the holy warrior. But at the same time, he has a certain dignity in his natural composure and comportment. He speaks slowly, unlike me. He speaks with conviction. He speaks with reference to the Prophet. And when he delivers, or when his network delivers, he's modest about it. He never claims responsibility for it. And that modesty, I think, reinforces his persona and his standing among his followers.
After the war in Afghanistan, Bin Laden returned home to Saudi Arabia. But the war had changed him. He became a hostile critic of the Saudi royal family, especially when it allowed the infidels, the Americans, to establish a military base on holy Muslim territory. Dissent is not tolerated in Saudi Arabia, even from members of wealthy families. Bin Laden was exiled to rural Saudi Arabia. He eventually fled the country. His new home was Sudan, where the Islamic government of Hassan al-Turabi encouraged Bin Laden. The young Saudi millionaire built roads and factories in Sudan and also used the country as a base for terrorism. After a number of violent attacks were linked to Bin Laden, the United States forced the Sudan government to expel him. Bin Laden returned to Afghanistan.
Going back to Afghanistan really put him back in the very heart of jihad. It was like an old soldier going back to his old battlefields, and there he had an enormous amount of friendships, and these were very informal friendships with warlords or fellow mujahideen, and these were friendships which were not affected by any interventions by state apparatus like the police force or the army. He was free to live there in peace, and I think he did, and he married a couple of times after getting there and raised a big family, while at the same time preparing the world for September the 11th, among other things.
Throughout the 1990s, Americans would get more and more familiar with Bin Laden. By the end of the decade, U.S. prosecutors had indicted him for blowing up U.S. embassies in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, also for the murder of U.S. military personnel. He's linked to the attack on the American warship, the USS Cole. U.S. prosecutors also suspect him of conspiring to obtain nuclear and chemical weapons. Even before September the 11th, he was high on the most wanted list. But for the Mujahideen of Afghanistan, Bin Laden was and is a hero. He indoctrinated a generation of young men who had no lives to live after the end of the Afghan war. Their own countries didn't want them back, and there was nothing else to do but kill. Bin Laden gave them a twisted sense of purpose.
All of the primarily young Arabs who came at the age of 14, 15, 16, up to 30 more or less, who came to fight on behalf of the West to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan, they had never had a job in their life.
That far down. Judith Kipper is a director with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a conservative Washington think tank.
The only thing they knew how to do was to fight a very filthy and very bloody and very ugly guerrilla war, a war that they presumably won for the West, And they went back home. They were not heroes. There was no opportunities for them, no education. And they were roaming around and certainly were fertile ground for radical views and for people who would pay them to continue to do the kinds of things they knew how to do, and that is to fight guerrilla wars.
If bin Laden is actually dead, it's not clear what will happen to his network, not just trained, but inspired by bin Laden, the legend.
I think that we've been blinded by the starburst of this mythological Osama bin Laden, and that there may be other independent cells out there that are fully capable of inflicting great harm on the United States.
The Egyptian Ayman al-Zawahiri, seen here with the microphone, is considered the brains behind bin Laden. He seems a likely successor, but Zawahiri hasn't shown much charisma. No matter how many recruits or how much money they have, no one has yet emerged with bin Laden's pure powers of persuasion.
Osama bin Laden will come to represent something unique, something brave, if barbarous in its way, an attempt. I think that in Saudi Arabia he will be recognized by a lot of the population as a genuine Saudi patriot who tried to liberate his country from a kind of occupation. I'm trying to look at this from the point of view of people in the Islamic world. I think they would regard him as a kind of comet that passed rapidly through the sky, scattering light and amazement and vanishing forever.
Osama bin Laden's legacy is entirely different for the people he has terrorized and those whose lives he has ruined. For The National, I'm Carol Off.
Here is our Prime Minister Stephen Harper to make a statement about the death of Osama bin Laden. Stephen Harper now.
Bonsoir. Le 11 septembre, can you all hear me? Okay, thank you. Le 11 septembre 2001.
Battle threats to our security.
On September 11th, 2001, 24 Canadians were murdered in the Al-Qaeda attack on the World Trade Center. The death of Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, reported today by President Obama, secures a measure of justice for these Canadians and their families. Bin Laden's death does not end the threat of international terrorism. Sadly, others will take his place. But this does remind us why Canadian Armed Forces personnel have been deployed to Afghanistan to deny Al-Qaeda and organizations like it the use of Afghanistan where the 9/11 attack was conceived and planned. Through their operations there to cut off terror at its root, our men and women in uniform have made an enormous contribution to Canadian security at home and abroad. Here, dedicated security officials have worked tirelessly and with success to prevent similar attacks in Canada. Protection of the public is the first and most important duty of government. Canada receives the news of the death of Osama bin Laden with sober satisfaction. We will continue to stand firm with our allies against the threat of global terrorism. Thank you.